Hey, everybody, it's Bunny Pounds. What a great week. I hope you guys are having a good week. We are. I just love putting out this podcast. Every week, we're putting out content to help you engage not only in your civic duties, but also to help you engage in culture. Man, what a crazy month we're having right now in the month of June. And I know we're all feeling it on multiple levels. There's so much things happening in our country. Just be praying through the news, guys. When you see a news headline, pray through it. Ask God for wisdom. Ask God how you're supposed to connect in your community. What are you supposed to do? I know I just got a Facebook post the other day with something that was happening in a public library here. And I'm like, man, this cannot be. We have to do something. So I just want to encourage you to get involved. With that in mind, many times we're talking only about government and politics here. But today we get to talk about culture at large, specifically the arts and the media. And I am so excited to have Brian Godawa here, who's an author and screenwriter and has been involved in Hollywood. You might remember his movie, To End All Wars, starring Kiefer Sutherland. I love Kiefer, and that was before 24 Days. But, that is a great movie. I remember that movie well. And then he wrote a book called Hollywood Worldviews, Watching Films with Wisdom and Discernment. You guys know I talk about wisdom and discernment and having that in the political realm. Well, we need to have that in Hollywood as well. So someone who's been in this field, writing books, writing screenplays, and being involved in film and the arts for over a couple decades. Brian, thank you
Thanks for
joining
having me,
us.
Bunny.
Oh, well, I want to hear so much of your story. You live here in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex right now, but you have so much going on. Like, you make me, I write a lot of stuff as well, but wow, the things that you've produced in your lifetime. So how did you get going in the arts and movies? That's exciting.
Yeah, well, I was in college, and I have to say that as a Christian, I've always been an artist, and as a Christian, I've also have been a Christian since I was in high school, and so I had struggled with how those two things worked together. And in college, I actually read Francis Schaeffer, who's not as well known now, but he was kind of one of the first Christians who really, at least in my lifetime, who really had a good understanding and a good challenge to the church to seek to integrate their faith not only into their political lives actively, but into their understanding of the arts and such,
We love Francis Schaeffer around here. I always talk about his book, How Shall We Then Live? Totally impacted my life as an 18, 19-year-old. So yes.
Yeah, well, that was when I basically I had my art and then I had my faith, and then he helped me understand how to integrate the two in a way that would be through worldview. Yes. And worldview is a major key. It's been a major understanding in my life that's driven me. And it's also been the way that I've it's also been part of my ministry to the church, seeking to help the church think more in terms of worldview, so that we have discernment.
Yes. So when you're looking as an artist, so you got started writing? How did you connect with the Hollywood crowd?
Yeah, well, I was a graphic designer. That's what I went to college for and such. And I actually am one of the self-taught people. So back in my day, I just read all the books that were out there, and there weren't that many in that day, And I read them all, went to seminars, and just beat the streets, and just kept writing scripts until finally my first movie got made, which was To End All Wars around 2001 or so. So yeah, I'm like the self-taught person, and I moved to LA with my wife and Southern California. And I just pursued the goal of getting movies made. And the truth is, as a Christian in the Hollywood business, things have changed a lot over the last 30 years. And when I first got there weren't that many Christian ministries, actually. There were Christians in the business, but there weren't that many. There was a handful, maybe some actors would meet together, some writers might meet together for a Bible study, et cetera. But then within 10 or so years, there was over a dozen ministries. So the Christian voice was growing and being amplified as years went on.
So you're saying ministries of people coming to minister to Hollywood professionals, or ministries that are connecting those folks for the purposes of projects, or both?
Both. It's a both and, but the primary focus when I say ministry is for the gospel and for the kingdom, related to their lives in the industry. Because so many of us artists really, we often feel misunderstood, and a lot of people with normal day jobs and stuff like that have no idea what the creative world is like, and it looks kind of weird and doesn't look normal to them, Right. And so there's a need to be around people that understand and can work together, but also in terms of teaming up in order to be a witness together within the industry. Definitely that's a part of it. I have to say personally, now after 30 years though, and certainly within the last decade, things have turned for the worst in many ways in the industry. And so much so that whereas when I first got there, it's like, they didn't, if you were a Christian, it's just sort of like, well, but you could not let them know if you were not a liberal or a Democrat, you could not let them know that. And so in some ways your politics were more important. But over the years, I think now there's such a hatred has grown in Hollywood for Christians who are conservative or just Christian now. And so many Christians are very quiet about their faith in there. And Hollywood itself has turned from sort of like snubbing their nose, tolerating Christians, now to hunting us down. So in other words, if you're writing material, stories that might have a positive Christian element to it, they seek it out and they get rid of you and they stop working with you. And that's happened to me, which is one of the reasons why I left Los Angeles, because it was no longer very effective. And so whereas I started out with a vision, and I still believe this in general, but I started out with a vision of we are to be lights in the world, not of it.
Yes.
And we are to incorporate our worldview. It's not about preaching. It's about incorporating values and worldview within your storytelling, within your art. And so it's more organic, right? But now it's gotten to the point where Hollywood has become so polarized and extreme that they won't let you anymore work unless you fit in with their certain left-wing paradigm and stuff. And so consequently, new parallel economies are starting to rise up, not because we're isolationist,
right,
but because we have no choice.
Right.
I mean, I know people far more successful than me that can't get work in Hollywood. And so now we're gathering outside the system and making, independent films and such like that.
So we're seeing Pure Flicks come up. We're seeing all these good, not just Christian movies that are like blatantly gospel presentation movies, like in the Billy Graham days, but also, good storytelling that's done from a Christian or faith perspective.
And, there's a big market for that.
There's
that
a huge
Hollywood
market.
Used to kind of understand. And there are still some Christian divisions like Sony has Affirm and such. And there are some Christian movies that get made within the system. I'm not denying that. It's not absolute. But by and large, it's been shifted so dramatically. But and there are independent filmmakers. The Daily Wire is for instance, it's a conservative media place, but interestingly, their goal is they're starting to release films, documentaries, and narrative films, dramatic films, and their goal is not to be not to have propaganda. They just want the kind of old good values that Hollywood often used to make in movies, right? So there's that branch, and then there's a lot of independents who I've worked with where we tell stories that just won't get picked up because they're not the dominant idea. So, for instance, my latest movie coming out within the next month or so is called My Son Hunter, and it's about Hunter Biden's laptop, and it's a political satire, and it's not about some political partisan bashing. It's a great story because that is a great story that no one was willing to tell, and no one's willing to distribute it. So we have to distribute it outside the system. We're trying to find some kind of distributor. It's been very difficult. It may just end up going online, which, that's another way of doing things that is now valid. Where 10 years ago you couldn't just do your movie and put it online; no one would see it.
Right?
But now you have a better chance of it being seen, even if you're independent with an independent voice.
So you could put your own movie on YouTube or some streaming system and do a paid subscription or whatever.
You can, however, if your viewpoint doesn't match their dominant left-wing, far left paradigm, then you're edited, you're shadow banned, you're cut off, you're demonetized, everything, and you're often just banned from the platform. So that's really too bad.
Well, as we're talking about this, I know there are people listening to us that have creatives in their life that, and my heart has always been to pastor all these people that are in these high levels of influence and are pushing against the narratives, right? Because we don't realize sometimes these guys are on the front lines. I talk to people all the time. You send your member of Congress to D.C. that is a strong believer. You better realize that they're like a missionary in that place, and you better pray for them and be in their life, right? The same thing for people in the arts. Brian, how can people really understand the creative world and minister to the people in that realm?
Oh, honey, bunny. Honey,
That's
bunny.
okay.
That has been one of my life's ministries, because I am politically active and I support it, but I believe that one of my sort of creative mentors, Andrew Breitbart, would often say that politics is downstream from culture.
Right.
And as much as I believe we have to be actively involved, of course, but the truth is that we win the hearts that enables us to pass the laws to have, and we're in a democratic republic, right? Mm-hmm. So what many of us often don't realize, and many Christians don't, is that well, we acknowledge it, but we don't put our money where our mouth is. So
Right.
here's the dilemma that I've had as a Christian and as a conservative filmmaker who's providing this alternative viewpoint, is that a lot of people in both of those worlds, they complain a lot about Hollywood. Now, this is where this is going to be my chastisement.
Yeah.
They complain about how bad Hollywood is, how bad it is, and they throw the baby out with the bathwater. But then they often don't. They'll still be watching Disney. They'll still be watching all these programs, and maybe they're a little bit more clean than others, but they're still doing that. And then when people like me come along, and this isn't just me, this is the circle of people that I've worked with for years.
Exactly.
When we come up with the great ideas that has the values that they want, it's the hardest thing in the world to get money, number one. And I have to tell you, and this isn't, I'm not crying victim or anything like that. It's just the reality is that a lot of, in the conservative world, they don't tend to believe in culture as much, and Christians as well. And the problem is I've been in the Christian realm as well with my art. I write novels about Bible stories. Okay,
yes,
so I
want to get into that as well.
Yeah. So, but the point is that my challenge is to those people in that world. If you're more of a liberal person, you do tend to understand that value of the arts, and it's worth putting the money in. Anyway, so we've had the producers I've worked with. I'm not a producer. I'm a writer. But the producers I've worked with over the years have told me relentlessly how difficult it has been to get the money, which means when we finally have the projects that you should support, you're not supporting it. And because we're mostly outside the system, we need that extra help. Classic case example, like I said, mentioned my son Hunter movie. We had to raise the money from normal people because we couldn't get it from people with big money, right? There's a movie coming out, and it's done Hollywood style. It's got Hollywood quality production values and everything. It's on Ronald Reagan. And I know the guys who made that movie, and they've been working on that for over, 10 years. And they've been to every, Republican, conservative, and Christian millionaire and billionaire in the country, and they could barely raise half of what they needed to make the money, to make the movie. And I'm thinking of all the people you think Ronald Reagan would be, he was a great man and great values, and, he was... You don't have to be partisan to like him, but even then, they had the hardest time raising money. So we've got to start becoming more involved in these things that rise up, like Daily Wire, or when you see an independent movie coming out, and we need to raise money to make this. You got to support it,
Right.
and even go out to the theaters when it comes out, because you just wait till streaming. Well, the problem is a lot of the interest and the ability to distribute this material comes from theatrical release. Now that's changing. I'll acknowledge that's changing. It's not as needed as it used to be, but it still is important.
No, that's a huge point. And I've always encouraged people, when some new Christian movie's coming out or whatever, to get out there and support it the first weekend, because if it gets the support, then it'll have extended weekends, right?
Yeah.
And that's really important. How do you work within a Christian worldview in the arts? I mean, how do you think I'm going to operate and navigate this as a believer in Jesus? How do you watch your soul, Brian? Number one, and guard your own personal life, walking in that space, and then also think I'm going to push the envelope a little bit on this. I'm going to sneak this in, or people on the other side with the atheistic and secular worldview are doing that all day long, right? And we've abandoned that as Christians. We think we have to have all or nothing. We're not thinking about we can actually take some of the pieces of the pie and put in a little bit of sugar, right?
Yeah.
How does that work out in your life, and relate that to your novels even that you've written?
Sure. Well, those two questions. So the first one, I think I would assume most of your audience is not going to be people involved in these industries, but I'll just address it quickly, and that is that sadly, I know of many Christians who've come to Hollywood, and over the years they have compromised and become more like Hollywood, less like Christ.
Yes.
I really believe that, and
we see that in government too.
Yes. So aside from the individual, but we also have to acknowledge Jesus Christ partied with sinners. So there's nothing wrong intrinsically with being in that world. It's a matter of what are you driven by, and are you driven by my art is the most important thing in my life, and I'll do anything to get the jobs, and therefore be willing to compromise. Oh, maybe it's not the point. Maybe I won't speak up. Maybe or are you? To me, the key is to be committed to a local body of believers to whom you are accountable and will help you through the various dilemmas that arise in your life. But see, that's the answer for every deal, isn't it? Whatever world you're in, you need to have that body of believers that is going to help you keep accountable. Okay, so that's that side. Now, in terms of the world itself of storytelling and art and such, I've written a book, Hollywood Worldviews. It's a classic now because it's actually pretty old, but it's still selling well because it was my attempt to try to explain to Christians or any Bible believers, Jews and what have you, of how to understand the nature of storytelling so that you can be engaged and discern and not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Because I kind of saw, at least in the church, and things have gotten better over the years, don't get me wrong, but there's still those extremes where you're either, baby out with the bathwater. What I called it, cultural anorexics, where
I grew up in a church where I never went to a movie till I was in 8th grade.
Exactly. Yeah, right. So, and that's still around. It's
Yes.
less, but that's still around. Or the effect is, right? And the effect is that, you do, granted, there is some bad stuff in movies, but there's it's the reactionary thing where it's just like, well, then I'm not going to expose myself to it. And the problem is that it's not always, it's actually even in and of itself, that's not always right, because one of the things I communicate to my wife can't handle as much of the, some of the way sin is portrayed in movies. And sometimes it is too gritty for her, and that's fine. But in principle, you have to realize that in order to tell a redemptive story, and this is what I explain in Hollywood Worldviews, you have to begin with a life that needs redemption. And if you don't accurately depict sin, then your offer of redemption by the end of the story, whatever it is not going to have any impact or power on people because the world from which you're being redeemed is not going to be believable to them. And so that's at least the argument that we've got to deal with the realities of the world, and that means evil and sin. But of course, you're going to have a great a continuum of, well, how much do you show, and how,
Right.
and that of course that's a debate that's worthy. But I just think that in general, the rejection of like you start watching movies like the guy's the guy's an adulterer and he sleeps around with all these women and stuff. It's like, whoa, hold down. Even in Hollywood movies, that they usually start that way because he's going to learn to become a responsible, moral man who will marry someone at the end.
Right.
And
There's
so
going to have a love story, redemption at the end.
You have to get there, So it's understanding that, and then the idea is worldview. Many of the time, in my opinion, and I still watch some Christian, not a lot of Christian movies, but Christian movies and such music, it's getting better. But the problem is that Christians tend to feel that if you don't, they tend to see art as a means to an end, as a means for a sermon. Mm-hmm. Oh, this is an opportunity to put a sermon into a dramatic form. And that's not how it works. Now, I'm not saying that you don't have your values communicate through it, but when you think of it in those terms, you devalue the art and you elevate the message. That's where we get so much bad Christian art because it's
Yes.
preachy, it's propagandistic. Even I watch this stuff and I cringe, and I'm a Christian, right?
Right.
But my what I try to explain too in Hollywood worldview is it's not just movies, it's art. But when you understand that the message and the medium should be equally ultimate, just like Jesus is equally God and equally man. So the arts have to be that way, and then that's how you seek to incarnate your view of the world through the characters of the story, and that's what I've done. And interestingly, so even though I've tended to shy away from Christian movies as a screenwriter in the past, I'm not close to it. It's just my goal was like I want to tell good stories no matter what they are, and they don't have to be Christian, whatever. But I got pretty good at telling stories about the Bible that incorporate the supernatural and incorporate theology in a way that's entertaining.
Right.
Because I've always loved theology, and not a lot of people love theology, but theology leads you to God. It's a study of God, right? But I understand, and not everyone likes that intellectual aspect, but I love to incorporate that into exciting, dramatic, Hollywood-type stories. And so I've written a best-selling series called Chronicles of the Nephilim. And it starts with Noah Primeval, story of Noah. And there's some fanciful imagination. I try to show what the spiritual world might look like with supernatural. We don't often know. There's not much about it in the Bible. There's glimpses, right? But so I push the envelope in that creatively, but I try to stay consistent within the scriptural understanding of who God is and such, and I try to fill in the lines. The Bible sometimes will tell us some things, but there's big gaps. And so I fill in those gaps with some fiction that will tie it together. But my goal is not to get people saved or to whatever, or even to, I don't even think it's to teach something to Christians. It's a great story, and I want to embody the themes and the meanings that affect me from that story, and I want to recapture that. And if it helps people, and surely it does. And of course, obviously, faith is a strong element of these stories, but it's an honest faith. I have a story about Joshua. Another element of Christians is that they have a hard time seeing their heroes as real humans. Like, our idea of Moses is more like Charlton Heston, right? And it's like, I love that movie too, let my people go, right? But my latest novel is Moses Against the Gods of Egypt. And the truth is, I studied that intensely. And between the lines and some not, and some very explicit cases, Moses had an anger problem. He had a stuttering problem. He was not a fearless man. Now, his faith helped him take those steps as he went on, but he didn't start he was very fearful in many ways. And so depicting that is what allows us to learn from heroes who are more human like us, rather than these out of reach sort of demigods or superheroes type characters, And so as much as I would critique a lot of Christian storytelling, I'm doing it, but I'm not doing it with that need to prove something, just to sort of capture the truth in a dramatic, entertaining way.
It is so good, Brian, because again, I don't care how long we go on talking about this, but we still have this secular Christian divide, right? And God wants to encompass every part of our life. I tell this story often, but we were at a festival out in Palestine, Texas, and we're talking to people about prayer, voting, and engagement. And this guy that was making salsa next to me, he said at the end of the day, 8 hours of me talking about all this, he goes, "Hey, come here." And I said, "Yes, sir." And he goes, "I don't even know if I believe in God. I got out of prison a couple years ago, and I was not happy that I was going to have some woman next to me talking about politics and religion all day long." But he said, at the end of the day, what I think you're trying to communicate after listening to you 100 times is this: if people actually believe in God, that God should impact every part of their life.
Absolutely.
And I'm like, wow, revelation. Yes, I wish the church people I talk to would get that understanding. So at the end of the day, God should be a part of every part of our life, right?
Absolutely.
if I'm watching Gilmore Girls, Jesus is sitting right next to me, right? But the problem is that we like to segment our life, and we like to think about this holy and profane and not realize that we can take God into all these places. Now, a couple of my favorite Christian movies, I will go here, is Amazing Grace.
Oh, yeah.
And The Case for Christ. I thought they did a great job there. But, again, knowing that those are geared towards speaking a message, but,
But they do a good job in communicating, incarnating, like The Case for Christ. Yeah, it's about a guy who becomes an apologist, right?
Right.
And but it's his story. He starts
as a journalist.
So that's how you do it. Not and you don't have to have you can have a conversion scene, because by the way, there are secular conversions in movies, right? Mm-hmm. So why can't So it's not. I'm not against conversion scenes, but does it always have to be in a church led by a pastor or a priest? I mean, come on.
Right.
Now, interestingly, there's a new movie out called Father Stu, and it stars Mark Wahlberg and Mel Gibson.
Oh.
And it's a true story of a priest, a guy, actually like a boxer, like in the lower class boxer guy who ends up becoming a priest. And I mean, there's cussing in it all over. Some people have a hard time dealing with, but it was what really was. Mm-hmm. And even as a priest, he had that harsh personality. But and look, I don't even like everything about the movie, but it wrestles with the fact that this was a man who not only starts out as a low class boxer, ends up as a priest, but actually ends up suffering and dying through physical maladies. And it's a strong message about suffering with faith in Christ that is just powerful. But like I'm not Roman Catholic, and I'm like, I wouldn't want to be a priest, but it's okay because you don't have to agree with everything. And that's another element of, I think, applying your faith to what you're watching. Yeah, I do think that we have to talk about where the bar is set, and for each of us, it might be different. The more that we're aware of how they're communicating the worldview and the ideas, I think the more capable we are of watching something and being able to discern, well, this is not good, but this is good, So like you mentioned, there could be great movies. I'm not always good at like picking them up out of the air.
Movies out of the air.
But I
Braveheart.
Well, that's my favorite movie of all time.
Exactly, isn't it?
But yeah, there's not much bad about that. But like one of my oldies is Jerry Maguire. Okay, I mean, it's just like sort of this kind of Hollywoodish type movie, but just its positive elevation of marriage within our world now. It is a beautiful thing that I support. I don't necessarily agree with all the values in the movie, but you don't have to agree with all values to catch values that are good. And and here's at the end of the day is, but how much of the bad do you accept? That's going to be debatable. But you have to realize that everything is a mixture, and so it's not going to be all good or all bad. And so you just have to define your line for yourself. I mean, I don't agree with everything I hear in sermons.
No.
Should I walk out of the church because of that?
No.
It's like, well, here's where I agreed with it. Here's where I didn't agree. And by the way, this is how I describe in Hollywood worldviews. The more you're able to do that, the more you now learn how to use culture as a means for communicating the gospel. I remember when I was, first wrote that book years ago, I had a day job. I'd go in every Monday morning. It was like, what movies did you watch, And I would sit there and describe, well, I like this movie, because of this, but then I disagreed with its worldview because of this or that. And I can't tell you that, everyone at first was sort of like, come on, Godawa, you're taking it too seriously. It's just a movie, But over time, they all got into it and said, you ruined movies for me in a good way, because then they would start talking about what they saw, what was good and what was bad. And they're less able to be manipulated by the bad because they could pick it out. But that was a Christian job that I worked at. But if you're with non-Christians at the water cooler on Monday morning talking about the movies, Maverick's out now, right?
Right.
When you learn what the message is that they're really communicating or the meaning of the story, it enables you then to talk about any movie and talk about the gospel. I can do that with just about any movie with an unbeliever. And I'm not forcing it. It's because I use the gospel to interpret what's good and bad in everything I watch.
That's so good, Brian. I mean, at the end of the day, we're trying to teach people how to have critical thinking skills.
Yeah.
That's what we're losing in our culture right now. And and why why we're just kind of floundering around, just taking in information and not using discernment or wisdom, like you said. That's so good. I know when my kids are small, I don't know if they still have it. Focus on the Family had this great plugged in online that
Oh yeah.
you could read the articles on the different movies and
Yeah,
just
yeah.
kind of know what you're dealing with before you put it in front of your kids. But that'll be my last question. And I want to, first of all, how do people find out about your movies and books and get them?
Yeah, well, my website is a very detailed website, Godawa.com, Godawa.com. Okay, and so like I try to make interesting and entertaining, and so if you really want to dig in and find out what all this stuff is about, but if you just want to go check out the books, almost all my books are in audio format, ebook, and paperback exclusively on Amazon. And so if you're interested in checking those out, a lot of times you can just go straight to Amazon and the book description will give you a vibe of what's going on, or series descriptions,
And these
So,
could be great presents for your kids and
yeah,
your grandkids.
yeah.
And, we need to get them reading things that push their imagination, right,
Right.
with a Christian worldview.
Now, I admit my stories, I'm retelling Bible stories, and Bible talks a lot about the sin and evil. And so they're like PG-13 is what I kind of call them now. So, you got to be careful a little bit with the younger kids, but older kids would just really appreciate them.
And you've dug in a lot to end time prophecy and all that fun stuff.
I have another controversial thing in our culture that is, by the way, as polarizing as the politics, and it breaks my heart because I have a minority view where I don't necessarily agree with a lot of what most people think, and so I experience a lot of that hostility of like, well, you're a heretic because you don't agree with my end times prophecy, and I think we all have to work on learning how to overcome the polarization and have disagreements and have good discussions, but be able to still accept one another with those differences. I think that's my heart's goal, because of what a polarized world we live in.
So what's your advice when you're talking to moms or dads out there that are, trying to figure out how to protect their kids and their innocence and their purity, but at the same time engage with, arts and media? I mean, how do you talk to people about navigating that world? It is dicey out there.
It really is. And, I think there's a couple main elements to that. One is, of course, you as the parent know your kid better than anybody else, and you know what they can handle and cannot handle. And that's, you have to operate on those principles. But I also think you have to adjust what you want in that with a little bit of the reality of they're going to get it anyway. All right. Now, that doesn't justify everything, but I'm just saying, if you know they're going to be exposed to certain things, I like what many of my friends have done with their children, where it's like they're going to preempt it. So like if a new Disney movie comes out, for example, which Disney tends to be more acceptable, right? But now they're embedding their bad worldviews, and they have for a long time anyway, like very feminist and all this. I think you need to sit down with them, watch it, and learn the kind of questions that will get them thinking and get them to respond. Not telling them, "Now, see, this is what was bad." Or it's like, "Well, so what did you think about this?" Learn how to interact and ask your kid questions. Get them to speak for themselves, and lead them with leading questions to be able to examine the values that they've watched. They don't even know, but they'll start doing it more naturally, And I have numbers of parents who've told me that very thing, and that's what they do. Sit down and say, so what did you think about, when that frozen princess says, let it all go and just follow what you want to follow? What do you think Jesus thinks about that? Those kinds of questions. And, so it's teaching them discernment through patient interaction. So that means you're going to have to be willing to allow them to see some certain amount of, let's put it this way, push the envelope a little bit beyond what you may want, because you need to prepare them for the worst that's coming. And we know it's so bad out there,
It is. God is leading us to have discernment and wisdom in this hour. And I just really appreciate you giving people a lot of wisdom, Brian, on how to navigate the culture right now, because it is difficult. It's extremely dark. But, we have a responsibility to navigate that by walking with the Lord and helping our children and grandchildren be able to walk with the Lord for generations to come, right?
Amen.
So that's what we're doing. So guys, check out Brian's website. Check out all of his books. I can't wait to read some. I'm going to read some. And check out this new movie. Again, what's the title?
Go to mysonhunter.com because it's not going to get publicized everywhere. mysonhunter.com, and you can find out all the information for when it's going to be released, where to see it, and you can see trailers there already. It's
awesome.
Going to be funny. It's actually going to be a satire. So
Babylon
dark
kind of thing.
Little dark and a little racy. Okay, but like I say, you got to show the world that you're critiquing accurately.
Right. Well, thank you, Brian, for giving us wisdom. And I just want to remind you guys, we have to engage in the culture. We have to take Jesus into all these places. And at the end of the day, we need to make him the Lord of our life and learn how to disciple the next generation. I remember John F. Kennedy used to say that his family talked more about what was happening in the country and more about what was happening in their community around their table, right? Around their kitchen table. So we are so tied. I'm going to go off for a second. We are so tied to our devices. We're not talking to our kids. So get off the devices, have moments where, an hour where you're eating and hanging out and not talking about your phones, and dig into these conversations. Because if we can talk to our families and bring the word of God into these conversations, we can lead people into truth and help them navigate these choppy waters right now. So anyway, that's it. Thank you guys, and we'll see you next time.